Her husband was a superstar. Nate Newton was a 3-time Super Bowl champion and a 6-time Pro Bowler. But at home, behind closed doors, he beat and abused his wife, Dorothy, for 20 years.
Author and television host Dorothy Newton knows firsthand what it's like to feel trapped in an abusive relationship. She spent years enduring violence from her ex-husband, former pro football player Nate Newton. In her new book, Silent Cry, she shares her story of triumph over abuse and how God can help anyone get out of an abusive situation.
Please welcome to the 700 Club, Dorothy Newton. Dorothy, welcome. I want to correct that you said it wasn't 20 years you were in the relationship, but 14, yes, actually, that this went on. Your book is fascinating. You grew up in a relatively poor family. So how did you go from that background? I mean, you were the first to go off to school and to accomplish the things academically that you had, to getting involved with somebody who was successful in the NFL.
Yes, absolutely. As a child, I watched my mom. She was abused verbally, emotionally, physically. Went off to college. In college, very actively involved in sports, and I helped start a campus ministry. And then after college, moved to Dallas, met Nate. You know, I thought he was everything that I'd hoped for. I was used to sharing Christ with people with the campus ministry in college. I loved the Lord so much. Meeting Nate was just an opportunity to share Christ.
Your love of the Lord is a strong thread that runs throughout the book, even in the darkest times of your relationship with Nate. Talk a little bit about life in the NFL spotlight, because there's a lot of pressure in that.
Yes, there is a lot of pressure. Nate was under a lot of immense pressure. I mean, the Cowboys had a lot of success, 3 Super Bowls.
Definitely.
In addition to the success, you know, there was often problems or trouble with the law. Like Nate was in trouble, you know, DUIs or DWIs, you know, it was constant. So publicly, it seemed great, a lot of public success. At home, there were many, many private struggles.
Okay. Well, and then you have the perception from everybody that, wow, what a lucky, blessed scenario you're in, you know, because it all looks so shiny and sparkly on the outside. And people want it to be that way, don't they?
Right. Everybody, friends, family, you know, everywhere you went. I mean, it seems like you were just all alone.
Yeah.
Seems like everybody was just intoxicated with this, the notion of this prestigious lifestyle. You know?
And it was a little like that in the beginning. I mean,
yes,
you were caught up in that too.
Oh.
It was the wonder that, you know, you had hoped it would be. So how did the abuse start?
You know, I loved my husband, and I wanted our marriage to work. The abuse started, there were signs, you know, before I'd even married him, but the signs were verbal, you know, but I denied it. I didn't want to think that those were actually abuse because he hadn't touched me. So in the beginning, you know, I made mistakes too. I compromised. You know, 26 years old, a virgin. I can't believe a time in my life when I didn't believe God's word about purity and remaining a virgin. But I compromised, became pregnant. And as soon as I became pregnant, the abuse started. You know, at first it was verbally. In the beginning, I believe because I messed up. You know, it was consequences for my sin. I did it wrong, that I needed to just stay in the marriage, work it out. You know, so in the beginning, yes, it was my choice. But then as time progressed, you know, it was no longer verbal. It was to the point where he was physically abusing me, and there was no way out.
You know, one of the things that you're sharing right now and that runs throughout the book is that sense that somehow you have to pay for the sin of having made a mistake, that somehow you couldn't get out of this because it was the price you had to pay. Is that common in the hearts and minds of women who find themselves in abusive relationships, that somehow the blame falls on me?
Yes, it's always, you know, when you're in an abusive situation, it's internalized that it's your fault. It's my fault. I messed up. I must be doing something wrong. You know, why doesn't he love me? You know, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, but nothing is working. You know, so you always internalize it that it's your fault.
There were also a number, it wasn't just the physical abuse, there were infidelities, there was just a complete lack of shared life, shared information, shared emotions in things. Yeah. How did you endure time after time? I'm gonna tell you, as I read this, every time you went back, I was crying in my living room, no, don't do it. You know? But that is a very common pattern. Why?
It's a cyclical nature, you know, the roller coaster, highs and lows. You know, in my situation, every time it happened, you know, I would think, this is the last time I would ever have to go through something.
Well, and the abuser commonly comes back after a cycle like that. Very remorseful, very sweet, very promising.
Yes. And then the time span of when everything is good is longer sometimes. Yeah. And then you think, okay, well, it's changed. And because I'm a Christian and because I know God, I know forgiveness as well. And, you know, that's part of it. Yeah. So you find yourself just back in the cycle over and over and over again.
And add to this the fact that, and I think this is pretty common too, though Nate had an unusual ability to do that, he had blessed your family in many ways. Yes. Your family had no idea. You never spoke of what was going on. You trusted very few people with that information. So then, as it gets worse and worse, who do you go to?
Right. I found it very hard to trust anyone. I mean, 3 Super Bowl wins. I mean, the hype is at the highest level imaginable. You know, my family, I should have gone to them. You know, a close friend, someone in my church community, I should have gone to someone I should have been able to trust. But I tried. And there was a couple of occasions where people just blew it off. They didn't want to hear it because of who he was.
So what was the turning point for you, Dorothy?
The turning point was, you know, there were so many times, but, you know, Nate, I had to do it under his terms. There was no way out. He would find me, you know, it was harassment, it was constant. So the turning point for me, I think, was one day he called and said, "Where are you?" And I said, "On my way to pick up our son." And he said, "You pick him up and you come home right now." The anger was worse than ever before. I mean, there were some hard times. And I remember thinking, this is the day. This is the day I'm gonna die because he is so mad. And if I don't go, he's gonna find me. So I remember just praying to God and saying, "Lord, you know, please, who will love my children?" I remember praying to him and saying, "God, you know, please let me live so that I can teach my kids to love him, to love you with all their heart and mind." And so I was just praying. So I picked our son up, Trey, from school. And then I thought, I better just stop at my best friend's house. And so I wrote a letter. I stopped on the way from picking him up and wrote a letter just briefly, you know, because we had always talked about a plan. And she and her husband, who are now married for like 30 years, I think, they would take care of our sons if something happened. But I also wanted to document that if something happened, it was because Nate killed me. Yeah. You know, so after writing a letter, it was real. Right after writing a letter, then I went home, asked our son, "Please, Trey, stay in the car, listen to music." It was habit, you know, just to buffer things out. Stay in the car, Mommy will be back. You know, kissed him. Didn't really know if I would be back. Went into the house, sat down, and when I went in, there was a gun on the countertop. I'd never seen the gun before. You know, I knew we lived on 6 acres. I knew in the back part of the property, you know, Nate had mentioned of something shooting snakes or whatever, but I never knew we had a gun in our home. So it was real even then. And he just started yelling and cussing and saying, "Who did you tell our business to? Why did you do it? You don't go to my job and tell my business." And I said, I didn't. But even backing up prior to that, I called the friend who I trusted. Her name is Valerie. I said, "Valerie, did you tell Nate? Did you tell him?" Because she was the only one outside of my best friend that I confided in. "Did you tell him?" And she said, "You know, I was helping." I said, "No, I promised, I begged you not to tell him." So anyway, I knew what it was. So sitting there in that moment, in the kitchen, in the chair, he kept yelling, "You don't go tell my business. Didn't I tell you before? Didn't I told you I would kill you if you ever spoke?" You know, and I was just begging and say, "Please, you know, we have, you know, our son and one is on the way." I was pregnant. I was pregnant. And then he took this table, and the table was up high, heavy. All of our furniture was custom made. And he took the table, the glass table, and he pushed it into my stomach. But my reflexes, I scooted out of the way and just fell and just kind of got my balance and back in the chair. And then he just kept torturing me with the same thing. And I kept telling him, "Nate, you know, please." I said, and then finally I said, "You know what? I don't care anymore. Just do what you have to do." And he just kept saying, "You ever tell my business again, you know, I will kill you." And then he picked up the gun and he pointed it towards me. Now, in reality, if he wanted to shoot me, he could have.
He could have.
But instead, you know, he shot and just shattered the glass behind me, the kitchen windows behind me.
Well, that would be pretty intimidating.
Yes.
That would be pretty intimidating.
I thought, so that was the turning point. Of course, I had our son, Nate King Newton is his name. And, you know, immediately following my pregnancy, Nate was in trouble again, yet again. And this happened repeatedly, where he was always in trouble. This time, a young lady claimed that he raped her. You know, so dealing with all that, and of course, you don't ever want to leave when things are happening, because then the anger, he always took it out on me.
Yeah.
It was just constant like this.
You know, you've been through so much. You've written about it. You are no longer together. Nate's life has taken a turn, a positive turn. I was happy to read that at the end of the book. There's a chapter where, you know, that's shared where he's at, and your children as well. When someone reads this, what do you want them to take away from it?
You know, I want them to be encouraged. I want them to be encouraged and get to know God. You don't have to, you know, you don't have to know it all. You don't have to have it all right, but just have a conversation with them, have a relationship with them. You know, I want to encourage hope, healing, wholeness, and that there's life, that he can restore anything, that he is able to do immeasurably. In Ephesians 3:20, he is able to do immeasurably more than